Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing well. There is an area of confusion amongst traditional Muslims and also amongst Christian scholars and various Christian groups as to who the Israelites are. So I need to remind you that the kingdom of Israel was divided into two kingdoms at the end of the reign of Prophet Solomon. So the kingdom of Prophet Solomon was divided into two kingdoms. The first kingdom, which is known as Kingdom of Israel, and I'm highlighting this here for you, these were the people, these were the tribes, the 10 tribes that disbelieved in Solomon. They disbelieved in David, disbelieved in Solomon. They disbelieved in that line of prophethood. The second kingdom, again, I'm highlighting that for you down here, was the kingdom of Judah. Kingdom of Judah stayed faithful and loyal to Allah's prophets David and Solomon, and they followed and obeyed Allah's commandment and promised to David that his sons will be ruling the true believers of that time after him. So kingdom of Judah was basically the faithful, loyal kingdom, and kingdom of Israel was the kingdom that abandoned Allah, our creator. They also started worshiping Baal. They basically didn't want to practice the religion that Allah had prescribed for them. They just wanted to follow their own wishes and desires and follow and practice the religion of other kingdoms around them. So this is key. You have to know this. If you don't understand the concept of these two kingdoms, you're not going to understand anything. So that's why I put this in the beginning. So you have to know this. This is documented. This is reality. This is fact. This is history, right? Now let's look at what happened to the kingdom of Israel. Assyrian Empire happened to the kingdom of Israel after they refused to believe, after they refused to walk in Yahweh's way, in Allah's way, and they wanted to follow their wishes, their own whims and desires. Allah brought the Assyrians, and Assyrians attacked and captured the northern kingdom of Israel that I just showed you. That basically 10 tribes of Israel, majority of Israel. That was the bulk of the Israelites, bulk of the ancient Israelites, the 10 tribes out of the 12 tribes. The Assyrians took them as captives, and what did they do to them? They dislocated them across the Assyrian Empire. Historical narrative tell us that the Assyrians settled the Israelites, the 10 lost tribes of Israel, here between Iran and Iraq. So this is where they settled down. So you have 10 tribes of Israel settling here. And this happens at around 732 before Christ, or BC. So now at this point, at around 732 BC, you have the 10 tribes of Israel located at around this area. So remember, back then the population was very little. The cities were small, and actually Israelites had a very good reproductive rate. And remember, Quran even mentions that. That's why Bible also mentions that as well. That's why Pharaoh was so worried about it. So Israelites had a very good population. So they are relocated to this area and they populate in this area, and they have been in this area since 732 BC. However, the southern kingdom of Judah here, which was smaller, it was only 2 tribes, it holds out against the Assyrians. The kingdom of Judah holds out for an additional 140 40 years. But then what happens to these last two tribes of Israel? The Babylonian Empire happens to them. Allah sends a series of prophets and messengers to Jerusalem, to the kingdom of Judah, but they also choose to not follow the messages and the guidance of those messengers and prophets. They reject them. They try to kill some of them. And eventually they decide to adopt the way and the religion of the nations around them. So Allah brings the Babylonian Empire to destroy the kingdom of Judah at this point. And what they do is that they relocate the inhabitants of Judah to Babylon. So majority, almost all of the inhabitants of Judah, the last two tribes, are relocated to Babylon at this area. So at this point, what is known as the kingdom of Israel and Judah, what I showed you at the beginning, those two kingdoms are pretty much empty lands with very minimal population. But then after about 70 years, the Persian Empire happens. So what does Persian Empire do? Is that Cyrus the Great, whose name is actually in the Bible as well, issues a decree and says, the God of heaven, our creator, has commanded me to relocate, to send the Jews back to Israel to rebuild the temple and start worshiping the true God. So that's what happens. So at this point, the Jews are allowed to leave Babylon to settle down in the Holy Land and rebuild the temple. But remember, we are only talking about the Jews who came from the kingdom of Judah, the last final two tribes. At this point, the 10 tribes mixed with the population of this area. We're going to come back to it. And also, not all of the Jews leave Babylon to go to the Holy Land. Majority of them do, but many of them at this point, they have married the inhabitants of the land. They have very high positions with the kings of Persia. Actually, some of the Jewish prophets were ministers to the Achaemenid dynasty, and they had very close relationship in terms of religion, which is very interesting if you consider that about 200 years before, the 10 tribes had been settled in that area between Iran and Iraq. So that is really interesting. I want you to keep that in mind. So this goes on and on up until the time of Imran, Zechariah, and Isa, Jesus Christ, son of Maryam, and John or Yahya, John the Baptist. Unfortunately, history repeats itself. Again, the inhabitants of the area and the Israelites abandon the Lord and disobey him and don't follow his prophets. The Jews disbelieved in Imran, they disbelieved in Zechariah, then they disbelieved in Yahya, John the Baptist, and then after that, finally, they disbelieved in Jesus Christ, son of Maryam, the Messiah. However, what you need to keep in mind, what most people forget to pay attention to, is that not all the Jews disbelieved in the Messiah. In fact, many of the Jews believed in the Messiah, perhaps even close to 50% or more. The Quran tells us that the Jews turned into two groups, and Allah supported those who believed in the Messiah against those who disbelieved, and they became victorious. Who became victorious? The Christians. The Christians became victorious. I remember that the early Christians were pacifist. They never or provoked the Romans. So they were not a threat against the Romans. And because of their behavior, eventually they took over the entire Roman Empire. So what I want to point out, what you need to know is that yes, the Romans did come. The Romans did attack the Israelites. However, they were not fighting against the Christians in Israel back then. They were attacking and killing Jews, and they destroyed the temple, and then they took the Jews, again, not the Christians. I want to make sure you know that, not the Christians. They took the Jews and they resettled the Jews in various areas of Roman Empire. So this time the migration movement was towards Turkey and Europe, as opposed to towards Babylon and Persia. So this is really important, that not all the Jews were relocated. There were half of the population at this point that was here were actually Christian. These were the people who had believed in the Messiah. They were living there as Christians, sometimes secretly, sometimes openly, but they never fought back against the Romans. The Romans had nothing to do with them. The Romans had no animosity with them. So you have this Christian Jews, basically these Israelites that at this point are Christian, still staying in the land and living in the land. So you have to keep that in mind. So let's review it together. You have the 10 lost tribes of Israel who settled here, and then later on, some Jews that came from the southern kingdom of Judah, they chose to stay here. They didn't go back, right? So we have a huge Israelite population here, okay? And then within the Holy Land, in what was known as Israel, you have the Christian Israelite remaining after the Roman conquering and after the Roman invasion and destruction. So Christian Israelites remain over there. And then you have the Jews who disbelieved, didn't become Christians. These are the Jews that disbelieved in that line of prophethood. They disbelieved in Imran, Zechariah, and John the Baptist and Jesus, son of Maryam, that were relocated to these areas in Europe, right? And obviously there were some minor populations here, we know, in some city of Medina and places like that, but they were minor. But majority of them were relocated by force by the Romans. And now Islam comes. After Islam comes, what happens? Now the religion of Islam comes and takes over all these areas, right? So all these areas fall under Islam. So you all know that, of course. So at this point, majority of the population of this area, majority are Christian. Even here in current day Iran, the majority of population at this point are Christian. Now, many of these people, many of these Christians, many of these populations, as you know, they adopted Islam. So what was known before as Islam, again, I'm not going to go into details in terms of what happened, but they fall under the umbrella of Muslim countries. So there are two groups of Israelites. Group number one is the Israelites who disbelieved in the line of the prophets, namely Imran, Zechariah, John the Baptist or Yahya, Isa or Jesus Christ, son of Maryam, and Muhammad. So who are these? These are the disbelieving Israelites. These are the Israelites who believed Jesus, the Messiah, was a con man whom they killed. So the Quran tells us that they also poisoned Prophet Muhammad to death. So who are these? These are mostly descendants of the kingdom of Judah. But we also have a second group that is mostly ignored, and this is where people make huge mistakes. Scholars, Muslims or Christians, or even Jewish scholars make huge mistakes when we are talking about the Israelites. Who are these Israelites? These are the Israelites who believed in the line of prophets, namely Imran, Zechariah, John, Jesus, and Muhammad. How did that happen? One group of them in the Holy Land, they converted to Christianity. That's how they believe. the other branch of them, the lost tribes and the remnants who stayed in Babylonian Empire and later Persian Empire, they later on became Christian and then they became Muslim. So you see, you have two lines here, and these two lines, one in Holy Land and one here in what is known as Persia, Iraq, and Syria, they continued that line. So they technically, these people are the believing Israelites in that line of the prophet. They believe in the Christ. They mostly believe in Prophet Muhammad, and they are mostly descendants of the northern 10 tribes, and which used to be the majority of the Israelites. There are also some descendants of the kingdom of Judea. These are the people who didn't want to leave, didn't want to go back to Judea. They had good jobs, they had good lives in what was known before as the city of Babylon and the area around it, so they chose to stay, and they were mixed with local population, and later on they were scattered across the Middle East in what is known today as Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, and also in Palestine and Syria. Remember, in Palestine and Syria, these are mostly the Israelites who later on converted into Christianity, and they stayed there. The Romans did not move them. The Romans had nothing to do with them, did not go to war with them, because they were not fighting back against the Romans anyway. Remember, they believed in the prophecy of the Messiah that said after 40 years the Romans will come and this house will be destroyed. So they knew that was going to happen. They anticipated it, and they believed that that was God's will. So they never fought back. Because of that, Romans actually never looked at them as their enemies, and they didn't take any action against them either. So this group, this second group, remember, they don't have any Jewish identity anymore. So which group is Allah referring to in the Bible when talking about the lost tribes gathering back? I think you know the answer. I'm not going to answer this. I think you already know the answer. It's very obvious. Unfortunately, many of the scholars are blind to this reality. They ignore historical facts, and they come up with some very whimsical and fantastic ideas that are nothing but fantasy. And that causes them to make huge mistakes and make a huge judgment call and a huge error. Peace and blessings to all of you.